Scientists recently mapped the genome sequence of the world's most resilient creature. Its scientific name is the tardigrade, but it's more commonly known as the water bear. Now, the water bear lives all over the planet, but if you've never seen one, here's what it looks like. Not exactly your cute and cuddly kind of bear. Fortunately, the tardigrade is microscopic and completely harmless. But I think the magnified version of the tardigrade would make a fantastic sci-fi movie character, not only because it's incredibly creepy, which it is, but because this thing is nearly indestructible. It can survive being frozen or boiled. It can survive nearly a decade without water, and it's the only known living thing that can survive the extremes of outer space. When the water bear doesn't like the conditions it's facing, it simply slows its metabolism and takes a long nap until the environment is once again more hospitable. Oh, to be a water bear. Just think of it. Facing a crisis, no problem. Take a long nap until things get better. My fascination with the water bear began about 6 years ago when I faced an unexpected crisis that I couldn't find a way to pivot out of. You see, I had been fairly resilient up until this point. I spent 16 years as an investigative reporter and survived all kinds of dangerous situations. I survived being shot at, being stalked by a known felon. I survived ovarian cancer, one of the deadliest cancers for women. I survived a major career transformation, leaving television news to start a nonprofit to raise money for cancer research, completely different world. And a short time later started a television production studio, which I also had to pivot to survive the recession. So when I look back on all that I survived, it's hard to believe and a bit embarrassing to admit that my so-called kryptonite ended up being, of all things, gossip. That's right, gossip. False accusations made about me in a major newspaper gossip column by a former disgruntled employee who filed a lawsuit against me, trying to bully me into a settlement. He later dropped his claims, but by that time, the damage had already been done. It destroyed what was left of my business and my reputation. Now, I can see some of you in the audience rolling your eyes. How could gossip be worse than cancer? It's not. But from my perspective, it sure felt that way. For me, once that gossip column hit the internet, it's there forever. A permanent black mark on my good name. It was so bad, thanks to Google, I couldn't even get a job working as a spokesperson for no-name steaks. Yeah, it's taken me a long time to be able to laugh at that irony. It was so embarrassing that I didn't even want to show my face at church, yet church ultimately was the place that I was able to regain the strength I needed to forgive and ultimately try to move on. But move on to what? I had no idea what was next. So I started to read books, you know, the kind that say, make a list of your skills, make a list of your passions, live your passions. So I tried that. Yeah, I love cake and I like to bake. So I thought, hey, maybe I could become a professional baker. Yeah. No. You cannot serve an X-rated Cinderella cake at a princess party. No. So then I thought, okay, my 90-year-old grandma is really great at making quilts. Maybe I could make and sell quilts on Etsy, right? Yeah. The squares are supposed to line up, just in case you're wondering. No, so much for that idea. Then I thought, okay, I love gardening. That's another passion. Maybe I could grow and sell some produce at the farmer's market, right? Anyone want to buy some ugly carrots? Clearly, at this point, I am completely lost and have no idea what to do next. It's funny how when we don't know our next step, we sometimes look for clues. I looked for clues in a bag of chocolate. Do you know those little Dove chocolates, the kind that have the fortune cookie-like messages on the inside of the wrapper? Here's what I got. Make a list of your dreams. Live your dreams. Make some day today. Okay, clearly I could have skipped reading all those expensive books and just bought chocolate, right? So, of course, this was not getting me anywhere. I needed to eat more chocolate to find some better clues. I finally get this one. Sing along with the elevator music. Be fearless. Okay, now at this point, I'm thinking maybe God is telling me that it's time for me to live out my dream of becoming a professional singer, right? I love to sing. And then I got, hey, why not? So I start to sing. Now, the song that kept coming to mind was this song from the 1950s by Doris Day, Que Sera, Sera. Do any of you know that song? The chorus goes something like, Que sera, sera, whatever will be, the future's not ours to see. Que sera, sera, what will be, will be. Clearly I will not be a professional singer. But that song helped to remind me that the future's not ours to see, that God's in charge. And so my job is to live each day with purpose. Resilience is commonly defined as the ability to bounce back from illness, trauma, tragedy, or other adversity. Some people are clearly more resilient than others, able to bounce back more quickly. And some are not only able to bounce back, they in fact bounce forward to turn the pain of their experience into something positive for the greater good. I knew some women who had done this, so I reached out to them and started conducting interviews and have since conducted dozens of interviews with women who have survived everything from job loss to business loss, divorce, rape, abuse, illness, cancer, suicide of a spouse, death of a child, civil war, and genocide. Horrific life events. My goal was to find a common thread amongst all of them to see how were they able to not only survive, but in fact thrive from their experience. Some of their stories intersected with mine, people whom I had met as an investigative reporter covering their stories. This woman, Stacey McBride, was one of them. She is an amazing person. Her sister, Tracy McBride, was kidnapped from a Texas Air Force base. She was brutally raped and murdered, her body thrown over a bridge. Her killer, Lewis Jones Jr., was caught and brought to justice. He received the death penalty. In 2003, the television station I was working for sent me to cover his execution. I remember feeling somewhat annoyed at having to undergo PTSD screening prior to being allowed to do the story. I was a tough-as-nails reporter. I had covered gruesome crime stories and horrific human dramas for a decade. This was just another story to me. But it wasn't. I remember thinking the death chamber lights were far too bright for what was about to take place. Lewis Jones Jr. wouldn't acknowledge the victim's family. He wouldn't apologize for what he had done. He wouldn't even look their direction. Instead, he looked at me, or rather through me, in a way that they say the eyes are the window to the soul. I cannot get that killer's eyes out of my nightmares. Now, fast forward 10 years, I wanted to know how Stacey McBride and her family were, so I reached out to them. Turns out when they couldn't make sense of Tracy's death, they decided to make a difference in the lives of others to honor her memory. They started a nonprofit to fund scholarships for young women who want to further their education to ultimately make a difference in this world. Pain turned into purpose. One awful tragedy became something incredibly powerful. I discovered a similar story when I met Marilyn Adams. Marilyn lives on a farm in Iowa. When her son Keith turned 11, she decided he was old enough to stay home from school to help with the corn harvest, sort of a sacred rite of passage for a farm kid. Keith was thrilled to have the big job of unloading each wagon. Now, if you've ever seen one of these gravity flow wagons, they're mesmerizing. The corn flows down and out, kind of in a whirlpool spiral. The sound is deafening. It sounds kind of like popcorn hitting a metal pan. It drowns out all other noise. So no one heard Keith's cries for help when he fell in and became trapped in that quicksand of corn. 14,000 pounds of corn, crushing his tiny body, suffocating his lungs. To lose a child is to face the unimaginable. For Marilyn, she was consumed with grief and guilt and contemplated all the ways she could kill herself. Instead, she somehow summoned the courage to start a nonprofit, to change farming practices, to warn farm families around the world of the hidden dangers of farm equipment. Her efforts have saved countless lives as a result. Now, after interviewing dozens of amazing women like these, it was surprisingly easy to identify not one, but two common threads. The first was faith. Each of these women realized that they had to lean on their faith to carry them when they could not bear to walk alone. Faith looked different for some who didn't believe in organized religion but felt a connection to a higher power nonetheless. And some blamed God initially for what happened, but all of them ultimately realized that they needed to turn to faith for the hope that it brings. For without it, there's nothing but dread and darkness. In addition to faith, the second common thread I've discovered is that each of these women finally realized they had to choose to pivot out of their crisis towards something different. No one could do it for them. The past no longer existed. They couldn't erase what happened. So the only way for them was to try to change by becoming something new, by creating something new that would help them change their focus, to pivot their purpose. Now, purpose doesn't always look like we expect it to. For me, I got a call from my church asking if I would go to Burundi, Africa, to produce a video and photographs of the work that World Relief is doing there. I'm ashamed to admit I initially didn't want to go to Burundi. I had a baby girl, and Burundi's not a safe country, and so I was worried. But at the same time, I couldn't say no to God if this was his call to action for me to use my skills in this manner. Now, going to Burundi is like going back in time, before cars, before electricity. It's the third poorest country in the world. More than 40% of the children are malnourished. At a malnutrition screening, my heart saw more than my camera lens could capture. I met this little girl named Adisa, who was so chronically malnourished, her hair had changed color and stopped growing altogether. Her mother told us that they had no money, and what little food they were able to scrounge up, she had to give to her other children because they were stronger and more likely to survive. Gut-wrenching and life-changing. Equally as life-changing was discovering that these people didn't want pity. They had survived decades of civil war and ethnic conflict, the kind of violence we've never even encountered in the First World. And yet they were happy. Look at these faces, face after face I encountered. These people had pivoted their lives to faith, forgiveness, and reconciliation. And seeing their joy was like something I've never seen before. They were truly happy despite all of their hardships. Artist June Steckler took some of my photographs and turned them into paintings. This one is my favorite, the one of Adisa. She painted her face on a board of rough wood to symbolize her yet unfinished and very uncertain future. A reminder to all of us, how do we want our stories to end? Sure, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to face crises. We may not always know what our next step forward is, but we don't need to know as long as we remember to have faith and a little perspective. Now, when it comes to perspective, I love 3D street art. Artist Sean McCann painted this for us to help us see the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. When you look at a 3D anamorphic image, if you look at it from one angle, it looks like the path could be leading one direction. The other direction, maybe your path's going that way. But if you step back and look at it differently, all of a sudden, your path may appear. For me, stepping back and gaining perspective on my whole gossip crisis helped me to see that it allowed me to stay home with my baby girl. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that changed my perspective on everything. So, my friends, remember that darkness ends where light begins. So embrace your Cinderella cakes, embrace your crooked quilts and your alien carrots. We don't need to know what our next pivot is, as long as we remember to live each day with purpose. Imagine how we could all change the world if everyone did.